Hello, everyone. Welcome to another IT Career Talk with Professionals. And today I have a director for worldwide marketing, products, and tech. My guest today is Mr. Wainwright Yu. Hello, Wainwright.
Hey, Rafi. Good to see you today.
All right, good to see you also. So, for our audience, maybe you can describe for us your role as director for worldwide marketing, products, and tech. It's quite a long title.
Right. But it's even hard to explain even for people who work at Amazon where I work.
Mm,
So maybe a simple way to describe it is we have marketers who work at Amazon,
right.
and they run marketing programs for us. For example, you might be a marketer trying to let customers know about a new Prime benefit. Is an example of that.
Mm,
And they need certain tools that allow them to market effectively to customers. So all of those tools are tools that my team develops. So I manage a team of product managers, engineers, UX designers, and we build the tools that help enable these marketers to be effective in their jobs.
right. So just to clarify, the product roadmap and the tech that will be built is not the of Amazon itself is not part of your coverage. It's actually the how to market those product and tech. Is that
Oh
is
yeah,
that
yeah.
is that clear?
Yeah, maybe to clarify, so the product roadmap for the marketing tools is
Mm,
part of what my team defines and builds. So maybe to just give you an example, so there might be, oh, here's a good example. So if you go to Amazon.com, you'll see the big kind of banner at the
right.
very top. We call
Right.
it the hero.
Mm,
That is an example of a product that my team owns. So we decide, for example, what types of messages to show there, what types of tools do we provide marketers to be able to schedule certain campaigns onto the hero. So those would be an example of a marketing product that you would build.
correct. So what are the skills and basically what do you need to have to be a director of such a large organization?
Yeah, I would say that if I look at myself and other people in similar positions, we all come from very different backgrounds. So for me specifically, I kind of what I'd say I grew up in product management. So when I joined Amazon about 9 years ago, I started off in a product management position. I was a product manager for several years, and then over time, I started managing other product managers and eventually managed other functions as well, including engineering and UX design and so forth. But there are other people who have a different path. So some people start off maybe in engineering. So they're a software engineer, they become a software development manager, and then eventually start managing product managers, and then they move up from there. So I've seen people come from all sorts of different paths as they make it to these types of cross functional roles.
Right. And would you describe that your growth here is like a um, vertical, you know, climbing up the corporate ladder? Is it or is it more like you shifted or from basically you horizontally moved to this department in that sense?
Yeah, yes, it's very non-linear. Maybe is one way to describe it. So this is actually my third role at Amazon. For the first 4 years at Amazon, I worked on the Kindle business. So you might be more familiar with Kindle. So I was working on the reading experience for customers. So whether you've read a book on a Paperwhite device, the actual device, or apps for iOS and Android and other platforms, that was the experience our team was building. I spent 4 years there, and I moved over to last mile operations. So this time, thinking about how customers get their packages, which is another core part of the Amazon business.
Right.
Spent another 4 years over in that team, and then moved over here. So I actually find that my growth has been quite non-linear, right? You can think of those businesses as being quite different.
Mm,
Kindle is more similar to other products like Netflix. Maybe it's a digital kind of experience that you create. Last mile operations is maybe more similar to FedEx, right? Like it's all
right.
about delivering products to customers and logistics and supply chain. And then my current team is again very different. It's all about marketing tools and products. So how do we think about measurement? How do we think about what is most effective to show a customer? Again, it's very different. So I actually find that a lot of people at Amazon and even just in the industry generally move across different domains, and it's actually quite one of the things that I find quite interesting: the ability to work on different spaces and innovate in different ways.
Right. Let's talk about your management style, especially at such a large organization when it's worldwide, as you mentioned. It's not like you're in charge of just the maybe Amazon US. You might be also be in charge of, let's say, Amazon Japan, uh, maybe Amazon Europe. How does that work
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of
So
style,
the way I
in
would frame
terms of
it,
style
yeah.
itself for you to manage
Oh,
the
I see.
people? Yeah, yeah.
I see. Got it. Got it. Yeah, yeah. So maybe I'll cover it in two ways. Maybe I'll just clarify first. What does it mean to be a manager, like a manager of worldwide products? What does that exactly mean?
Right, right.
And how many people do you have in various locations? So I'll start there. So generally speaking, what we try to do is we try to build products that scale, meaning we try to think about basic user requirements that we think are actually common as you go from place to place and country to country. Obviously, there would be some unique user requirements as you go, from, let's say, a country like the US to a country like India. There would be
Correct.
a lot more differences. But if you go from a country like the US to a country like Canada or UK, there might be more similarities. And so our team actually is largely based out of the US, although I have team members in other countries today, like Romania and others. But we're largely a team that's based in a few countries, not worldwide.
Mm-mm.
Even though the products that we build, are used by users in various countries. And the way we stay close to our users in that case is by doing user research, both qualitative and quantitative, so that we have a good understanding of how customers behave in different places. But yeah, I have the fortunate kind of the situation of not having to manage people in so many different countries
Right.
instead of having to build a global roadmap.
I see. And is your style more towards, I would say, authoritative? Is it more towards leadership? I believe,
Yeah, yeah.
I really like the Amazon leadership principles, right? Maybe you can also share some of that you resonate with more.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say that just Amazon's kind of leadership philosophy is really to try to empower people in the front lines. What that means is the product managers or the engineers that are closest to the customer often have the context and the knowledge that it allows them to make the right decisions.
Right.
If you have an authoritative style, what happens is someone who's very high up in the management chain makes decisions, but they don't actually have the information to make the right decisions. So the likelihood of making the wrong decisions is just very high. The other thing that's a bit of a downside with a more authoritative style is you also slow down the organization, because everybody waits for you to make a decision. So I actually think that my own style, and generally the style that I see applied across the company, is one where we really try to empower our teams to make the right decisions. And maybe my own description of it maybe is it's like a federation of companies rather than a singular company, right? Like you have these smaller companies that are largely autonomous in many ways. They do have the responsibility to report back results to the leadership team. They have the responsibility to sign up for goals and targets. But a lot of the day-to-day decisions the teams should and can make independently.
Right, right. And given the nature of your global scope, you're working with different people in different companies. How do you feel about remote working? No? This is a sudden, I would say, sudden increase in remote working for a lot of people. Was this very different for you, or is this like it's just the same because you're already operating at a global scale?
Yeah, I'll give you my own kind of experience, just my personal experience on this one. Um, in my prior role, I actually had half of my team working in India, and so we were already remote from each other in that sense, right? So we still had to interact with each other a lot over the phone or on video conferencing and
Right.
other things like that. So to some extent, we were actually somewhat prepared for for the pandemic, because we already had some practice working with teams in Europe, working with teams in India. Um, and I would say that one of the things that made it maybe easier is if everybody is remote, I think we are less likely to leave people out of the conversation. I think one of the things that can sometimes happen is if 9 out of 10 people are in the room and there's just one person who's on the phone, then the likelihood for everybody to just focus on what's happening in the room is very high. And it's really hard to be inclusive of the person on the phone. But now that everybody's just a picture on the screen, I think we're all more conscious to give each other a space to speak. and to be listening and aware of each other, which I think is great. I hope that once we return back to the office, we maintain some of those good behaviors, so to speak.
Right, right, right. As a as your team grows, no, this I would say it really is the age of e-commerce in that sense. How do you hire, or especially now that I would say it's a global landscape, your skills doesn't necessarily have to be in a particular location anymore. Given it's remote, you can hire in India, as you mentioned. You can hire in the Philippines. How does and we know your company is a, I forgot the term there, like no age, no gender. What was that called again? Um, so how do you hire? Do you look at certifications, experience? Do you look at, hey, they have to be in the Fortune 500?
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting question. I actually find that certifications and prior roles and all those things, I think they're just good ways to identify talent and filter talent. But at the end of the day, that's really not what makes people successful. I think and I'll give you actually an example. So as an example, I mentioned earlier that I moved from Kindle to operations.
Right.
I suspect that if I actually applied for a job at FedEx, they probably turned me down because I have no, like, at the time, right? Because I had no experience in logistics or operations at all. And so what's interesting at Amazon is there's a bit of a belief that people who just have good foundational skills
Mhm.
and have strong motivation can be successful. And part of the reason why there's a little bit less of a emphasis on prior domain expertise is because sometimes a lot of the things we work on may not actually be an established domain, right? So
Right.
if you're trying to do something first or new, you actually have to go invent it, and you can't just copy from an existing industry or copy from an existing kind of pattern. So there's a bit of a belief that if you need to invent, you're really relying more on foundational skills than expertise, so to speak. But as you're doing that, the question is, how do you find people who have the foundational skills?
Yes.
And that's where sometimes certifications and prior history and credentials sometimes help you, because if you don't look at that, then what other signals can you use to be able to identify the talent? So I'd say it's not the thing unto itself, but it helps identify talent. There could be other things that helps identify talent. I find, for example, that people who've worked at startups before as a founder, typically go through experiences that are quite difficult, right? The experience of
Yes.
fundraising, the experience of trying to
To
trying
scale.
to
Yeah.
believe
Market
in something
fit.
before anybody else does,
Yeah.
right? Those are also super useful, and sometimes even better than say a business school degree or other things.
Right. Right. And you mentioned about the school degree. So maybe we can dial the time a bit, no? And go back to high school, your high school and my high school.
Yes, yes.
So maybe like maybe you can give insight to our audience how you picked your course. Did you always wanted to be in the IT IT sector?
Yep, yep. You know what's funny? I'll give you a bit of a funny kind of story. So I have two older brothers,
Right.
William and Walter, and both of them actually have uh, um, degrees that are closer to IT. So my oldest brother William has a degree in computer engineering.
Mhm.
My older brother, my second older brother Walter, has a degree in, I think it's called what is it? Not name management,
Management
management
information,
engineering.
management engineering.
Management
Okay.
engineering. Yep, yep. But he then graduated and worked at HP and did a bunch
Mhm.
of stuff, right? So they were more closer to IT than
Right.
I was. I studied philosophy and accounting
Mhm.
for my undergrad, so definitely not exactly in IT. And my first job out of college was working at Procter and Gamble. So I was working in brand management, which is also
Right.
not kind of in the IT space. So yeah, no, I'd say I wasn't in that path, but ended up there a bit later in life.
Right, right. So I guess to our audience, no, it just shows that you really can start anywhere and still end up in an IT sector. Yeah, and maybe from there you mentioned that you work at Procter and Gamble. At what point did you I know from your profile that you decided to take up masters. So what led you to that point? Like, there's also some question, hey, do I just get that experience or get that knowledge in the industry, or should I pursue a master's degree?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I can tell you my story, and then I can tell you about some other people who I know who've asked themselves this question about whether they should take an MBA, for example, and then what and kind of my thoughts they share with them. So in my case, I was working in Singapore for Procter and Gamble. So I was working on the Asia business for P&G. And one of the reasons why I thought I was interested in taking a master's was I was just curious about what's there further. Like, there's always this perception, at least, when I grew up in the Philippines and then moved to Singapore, there's always this perception that there is bigger challenges somewhere out there.
Right, right.
And this idea of taking a master's degree in the U.S. just helped me kind of maybe see what was there behind the curtain, right? Like, there's these schools, they're great, they do a lot of different things, there's probably like a lot of really smart people there, and I was just curious. Like, I just was curious about whether, like, how much of that was true and whether I could make it. That was really the motivation, honestly. I can tell you a bit about, in retrospect, how useful it was.
Yes,
for
please.
me. I think in retrospect it was useful for a few reasons, and this might not be the reasons you would expect. One, it was definitely useful in terms of opening doors. So especially for jobs in the US, I was in Singapore, moved to a master's degree in the US, and then applied for jobs in the US. So it was definitely very useful because the US companies would recognize the school I went to and say, yep, we recruit from that school, and that immediately opened doors. I would not have otherwise gotten interviews at companies like Amazon had I not taken that degree. It's just hard to, like you said earlier, like, hey, how does credentials matter? And I'd say credentials matter a ton in maybe opening doors.
Right. Or
It
maybe
doesn't matter as much in terms of how successful you are in the role, but it matters definitely for opening the doors.
right. It helped your
So
visa in that sense also, right? Was that like
definitely,
a
yeah.
student visa and then moved to a work visa?
Yes. So I was on a student visa, and then had, I think with the F1 visa, you get a year called OPT, where you can work for a year even without the H1B, and then I got the H1B thereafter. This was still the years back in 2012, where it was easier to get an H1B. It's a lot harder nowadays than it was back then. So it was definitely helpful from that perspective. It was helpful also for career switching. So if you're someone who wants to switch to a different industry, doing something like an MBA is helpful, or doing a master's degree that's closer aligned to that industry is helpful, for all the same kind of opening doors reasons. Which takes me a bit to the advice I give to some people, because some people who work at Amazon might say, like, hey, I want to go and get a master's degree, maybe an MBA, should I do it? And some of them are actually already, for example, product managers, and what they want to do is do the MBA and come back as a product manager,
Right,
meaning
right.
they're in the same industry, in the same role, in the same country. And for that case, like, I'm a bit, I would tell them, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for the experience of a master's degree, maybe building the network, those are also good reasons to do it. Then go for it. But if you're looking for career advancement, it may actually just slow you down. Like, you're going to spend 2 years doing this thing,
Right,
and spend quite a bit of money on it, and you could have just gotten promoted to those levels just by continuing work. So it kind of depends on the situation a bit. I would say that the thing that I didn't get as much was just the academic learning was not as big a deal for me. I think with a few exceptions, I think the leadership classes were very good. And same thing with some of the innovation kind of entrepreneurship, design thinking classes were also very good. But some of the harder skills like finance and marketing and so forth, I found, like, I think you could learn that in other ways beyond having to go to school.
Right. And from there, as you mentioned, you joined Amazon. So maybe we can ask about, how was the experience of joining or preparing to join a one of the top companies in the world, I would say, right? Not a lot of people would want to join Amazon, I would assume. And how what are your tips, or maybe what can you say about helping them get into Amazon, if you can?
Yeah. I think maybe there's tips when you're kind of interviewing, and there are tips when you've gotten accepted and you're joining. So the tips when you're interviewing, I would say, I think and you can find this a lot on the internet. This has been talked about quite a bit, and you even mentioned it, the leadership principles. That's really a large part of what Amazon screens for. There's definitely a certain amount of screening around some of the functional skills, but a lot of it is also screening for cultural fit and leadership. And so just make sure you don't underestimate the amount of time you have to think about whether your own personal leadership and your own personal values are a good fit and a good match versus those leadership principles. I actually think that we take the leadership principles very seriously, much more so I find than many other companies do. For their kind of the leadership principles that they put on the company kind of walls. For us, it's really kind of a really big part of the day-to-day life. So to think about that, and I think if you think about that deeply, it will prepare you really well for the conversations during the interviews. And I think when it comes to having gotten the role and then having come in, I would say that it's a lot of delivers results. If you've heard about the leadership principles, one of them is called delivers results. A lot of people who succeed really are very focused on the results. Meaning, what are the things that I need to do to be able to deliver more results over time for my customers? And that's really, at the end of the day, the big barometer. As you figure out what are the things you need to change about yourself or improve to deliver results, I think it differs by person. Sometimes it's more about maybe influencing others on ideas. Sometimes it might be about diving deeper into some of the problems you encounter or the technical solutions. It could also be like simplifying, like if don't overcomplexify, to simplify the solutions you can launch sooner. Right. There's many different things, but at the end of the day, I think it's if you can deliver more results, I think you'll end up being more successful, and that's been it's very helpful for me.
Right. Maybe you can also elaborate with your path. You've been in corporate companies for very long period, right? And so right now there's also a lot of buzz about startups, but maybe you can also highlight the advantages of joining a corporate company and especially joining long term.
Right. I would say I haven't worked in too many companies. I've probably only worked at 2 companies really in my entire career, so that's not too many. So my point of view on this is a bit narrow. I think one of the reasons why I enjoy working at Amazon specifically is because it does feel like it allows you to blend the experience of working at a startup, which is really all about the experience of building a new product, right? It's usually like I have an idea, I need to go through the cycle of figuring out who my customer is, the product market fit, and then scaling the product, and then once you hit stability, then figuring out what's the next level of growth that you can imagine. And I actually find that Amazon does a really good job of enabling individuals at various levels, even at the kind of the more entry-level positions, to really participate in that type of entrepreneurial experience. And that's actually one of the reasons why I really, really enjoy it. I've stuck around for quite some time. One of the benefits of maybe what I call being an intrapreneur, being an entrepreneur inside a company,
right,
is there's 2 things. I think maybe 3 things. One, you get to focus on the core job. If you're really an entrepreneur, you spend a lot of time thinking about other things. And I actually worked over the summer, at least for a short period of time, at a startup, really, really small one. It was less than 10 people. And if you're a founder in that case, you have to focus your time on a lot of other things, capital raising, buying the furniture, HR issues, where there's a lot of things you think about that's separate from just building the product. And that can be a good experience. That can be an exciting experience, but it can also be distracting depending on how you think about it. So if you're an intrapreneur, you get to focus a lot more on the core of product development more than some of these other types of important functions that other types of functions that the bigger company would take care of, like HR and finance and accounting, etc.
Right.
The other thing is it's also the risk of the risk equation is a bit different. So if you're an entrepreneur and you found your own company, if you're successful, then all the rewards go to you.
Right.
But if you're not successful, then you could be in a tough position as well.
Right. Especially if you're grassroots, right? And you use your family's money or your friends' money.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally. Yeah, but if you're an entrepreneur, then it's a bit mitigated on both sides, right? If you're very successful, then obviously some amount of the rewards go to you, but not nearly as much as if you founded your own company. But if you do fail for whatever reason, then at the end of the day, you probably end up still having a job. You probably just move on to your next venture within that company.
Right.
Um, so that's another thing that as you think about your options, that plays a role as well.
And I guess it's very lucky that, your company, Amazon, is very intrapreneur friendly. It's unique to Amazon, right? Not all companies do have that ability to be very, agile in that sense, or, the pace of innovation is not there for a lot of other companies. Um, so
Yeah.
just a couple more questions that if I can ask at this point, no? Maybe maybe if you can just as you mentioned, yeah, if you were going back into time and advising yourself, what advice would you give yourself, and maybe some of the bits our audience will actually learn from, right? Maybe you can advise your newly grad self. Hey, Wainwright at 2005, 2006. What would you say to yourself?
Funny. Rafi, I think you might remember this because we were together in high school.
Mhm.
I wouldn't consider myself to be the best, most motivated grade school or high school student,
Right,
honestly.
right.
And I kind of needed a kick in order for me to kind of realize that actually working hard is really important. And I kind of got that kick a bit late. Um, and I sometimes wonder, not so much advice of things that I would change. I actually think since I got the kick, like in my life, I kind
Mhm.
of really I turned a leaf, so to speak. But I do wonder sometimes if I never got that kick, whether my life would be totally different. So let
Mhm.
me maybe give you a little bit of a story about exactly what that kick was. So when I was almost graduating from high school, uh, I was applying to colleges, and obviously going through the process like everybody else. And my two brothers had their college tuition paid by my parents, and
Mhm.
their family friends. um, and I couldn't have that happen for me for various kind of family reasons.
Mhm.
So the well has run dry by the time it came to my turn, so to speak. And so
Right.
I couldn't really go to the same schools unless I got a scholarship. And I honestly think that my grades and my performance probably wasn't nearly as good as my older brothers. And so I wasn't very hopeful that I would get a scholarship,
Mhm.
and actually got one to LaSalle, which was completely a surprise. And I think I still owe a lot to the school for giving me a chance. And once that happens to you, you kind of just realize, like I think this is just super lucky. Need to just make the best of this experience. And from there, I actually think that I worked a lot harder than I ever did
Mhm.
prior to that point. So it's not really advice, but I think my thought there was, I think you sometimes you get lucky breaks, and when you do, you kind of really have to make the best of them.
Right, right. So if you have a break or lucky break, just grab it and don't miss it in that sense.
Yeah.
Now that you are, I would definitely consider you successful. On a personal level, how do you define success, or what makes you successful?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I actually feel like that success is always feels like it's just just a little bit further away.
Right, right, right.
you know,
A moving
every
goalpost. Right.
yeah, moving goalpost every moment, like it's always just a little bit further. Um, and I think my mentality on this probably has matured. I think earlier in life it was a lot of just moving the goalpost as far as possible, and
Mm,
it's a bit of competition, like understanding like, oh, can I be better than who I am today? And what does that mean? And there's the constant striving for becoming better and better. And that was probably a large part of the motivation earlier in life. And maybe now it's kind of changed a bit, and I don't think I've really kind of taken action on this. But a lot of the motivation now is just making an impact.
mm,
Um,
mm.
how do I make sure that the things that I'm doing are impactful, and are making a difference? And that's a big part of the motivation. Um, Yeah, so I think that's the definition of success is people who, when you look back and you say like, hey, the things that I did mattered, right? If I didn't do those things, then the world around me would be different in a meaningful way. That would be a great definition in my mind.
Right, right. And maybe my next question actually helps answer this, no? What what are you currently passionate about, whether it be in work or outside work or work-life integration, as your you know founder likes to put it? What are you currently passionate about?
Yeah, I'd say there's two things, and one's probably bigger than the other one. I'm really passionate about growing teams.
Mm,
Which is I really enjoy kind of working with people, identifying people with potential, investing in them, and seeing them become successful. It really is one of those things that excites me, makes me feel like coming to work every day.
mm,
That's definitely a big part of it. And secondarily, I think I'm also really excited whenever we just ship something.
right.
That's one of the fun things about working in product and engineering, right? Like you ship something, you create something that previously was not there, and then a few months down the road, you can ship it and you can say like, look, there's the thing we worked on, and customers are using it. That's always
Right.
satisfying. No matter how many times you do it and how many years you spend doing it, it's always satisfying at the end of those life cycles.
All right. So thank you very much, no? And to our audience, if you have any further questions, comments, you can always leave it down below, right? And if you are perhaps listening over Spotify or Apple Podcasts or other mediums, then you can also message me, right? Um, Wainwright, do you have any last, I would say last call out or shout outs, or anything that you want to say to our audience?
The only other thing I'd say, Rafi, is I've been super lucky also in just having a significant other who's followed me and kind of supported me
Right.
through all these years. You might actually remember her because she actually also grew up in the same place. She grew up in Cebu. Met her in high school. It really helps. Sometimes when you want to go after and be kind of ambitious in your career,
Right.
it often helps to feel like if you do fail, there's someone there to catch you. And so big shout out to Jane for being there.
Right. So big shout outs to all our significant loved ones. No? I would say picking a your partner in life is also another very hard decision, but also a very rewarding decision. Right.
Right, right.
Right.
It's yeah, it totally it makes a big difference in everything you do.
Right.
Thank you, Rafi.
All right. Thank you so much. And audience, thank you again for watching us, and goodbye.
Bye.
And of course, if you like our content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe button, and notification bell.